Okay. Mhm. Uh, Good morning. Can you hear me? Thank you, Andrea. Thank you. Sorry for the delay. Today, we are going to talk about illegality and public policy. Who can tell me what is illegality, or what do you think this topic is going to be about? Okay, the contract is illegal. And do you think like this is because of the parties? The parties have done something. Why do you think is that? Exactly, the contract cannot violate law or statute. Thank you, Sandeep. Not because of the parties. This topic, this subject of illegality, is a difficult subject within the law of contract law. Contracts may be tainted by illegality because making such a contract itself is prohibited, or because its means or its ends are illegal. Okay, a contract affected by illegality, like you have said, is one that fails for reasons external to the contract and the parties to it. The effects of illegality upon a contract vary greatly from none at all to complete unenforceability. We are going to see, different cases where the courts sometimes have kind of give a remedy to the innocent party, or sometimes they haven't enforced the contract at all. Illegality will affect the following contracts. A contract to commit a legal wrong, for instance, a contract to murder somebody. Also, illegality will affect a contract which promotes immorality, but we are going to see like what was considered immoral, like years ago, now is not considered that. Also, a contract which is performed illegally, and a contract which is not formed in accordance with the procedure prescribed by a statute. Okay, let's go to what are we going to see in this lecture. We are going to talk about statutory illegality, common law illegality, and the effects of illegality. Let's start with statutory illegality. What do you think is a statutory illegality? Why a contract may be illegal? When we talk about statutory illegality, you have said it before. One of you said it before. Andrea, and you said when a contract cannot violate a statute. So what we can say here is like a contract may be illegal because its formation, its purpose, or performance contravenes some statute or the common law. So here, we need to make a distinction that exists within the illegality cases, okay? The first distinction is between common law illegality and statutory illegality. In the first slide we mentioned, like common law illegality is related to such a contract to commit a murder or a robbery. And statutory illegality is, for instance, when a statute requires the vendor of certain goods to possess a license to sell the good, okay? The second distinction that we can see here is contracts that are illegal as formed and contracts that are illegal as performed. Okay, a contract that are illegal as formed can be a contract to commit a robbery, for instance. Since the beginning, this contract is void. And contracts that are illegal as performed this contract is legal as formed, but when it is performed, there are some issues with illegality, okay? For instance, a contract to deliver pizzas, then performed by a motorcyclist who exceeded the speed limit. So the contract was legal, but because the motorcyclist exceeded the speed limit, the performance of this contract become illegal, okay? So here, in general terms, courts will not enforce a contract which involves an illegality. That's the general rule. Also, the court will not allow the recovery of a benefit conferred by an illegal contract. What are the reasons for this? What do you think that are the reasons? Because courts will not like to enforce a contract that is illegal or that allow a party to recover a benefit. Any ideas? Do you have any, because they will be pronounced illegal concept. It is not just. The reasons why the courts act in this way is because they want to deter parties from such a conduct. Also, they want to punish the wrongdoer. They want to preserve the dignity of the court, and also for reasons of public policy. However, like there can be a harsh if the court refuses to enforce a contract because of illegality. This harsh can be in the innocent party. So because of this, courts will sometimes allow a party to enforce a contract or to recover a benefit confirmed. We are going to see, some cases that illustrates this idea. So at first, the general rule is like courts, they will not enforce a contract, an illegal contract, and also they would not allow the recovery of a benefit confirmed by an illegal contract. However, to avoid a harsh or unjust enrichment that the wrongdoer can have, the courts will sometimes allow the innocent party to enforce a contract or to recover a benefit confirmed. Okay? So let's go to the next slide to talk a little more about statutory illegality. Like we said before, that contracts that are illegal as form, they are void ab initio, which means like from the beginning. Okay, these contracts are also known as illegal per se. So I have mentioned, these contracts happen when a contract is illegal as formed from the beginning, so it is void ab initio. The illegality is present from the outset of the contract. For instance, a statute may expressly prohibit a certain type of contract. Contracts which are expressly or impliedly prohibited by a statute or public policy are void and unenforceable, even if both parties are ignorant of the facts constituting the illegality and had no intention of breaking the law. You know, that is the general rule. So, and when the contract is void, the issue is whether or not a party who is innocent of wrongdoing can recover a benefit confirmed by the contract. Sometimes the benefit can be recovered, and in other cases, it cannot. These concepts have been illustrated in the following cases: Mahmoud versus Istahani and Mohammed versus Alaga and company. Who knows? Do you know like the facts of the first case that we are going to talk about, Mahmoud and Istahani? And if you do, can you tell me briefly the facts, please? It is fine if you don't know. You can let me know so I can give you the facts of this case. So in Mahmoud versus Istahani, the plaintiff had agreed to sell linseed oil to the defendant, but there was a statutory regulation provided that no person should buy or sell linseed oil except under and in accordance with the terms of a license issued by the food controller. The plaintiff's license allowed him to sell this oil only to persons who were also licensed. The defendant didn't have a license, but induced the plaintiff to enter into the contract by fraudulently representing that he did. The defendant subsequently refused to take delivery of the oil, and the plaintiff sought to enforce the contract in an action for damages for not acceptance. So this case considered the issue of illegal contract and whether or not a contract for the sale of goods was enforceable, where it was illegal, but the seller of the goods was unaware of its illegality. Okay, so here we have a statute which prohibits to sell or buy this kind of oil without a license. Okay, the plaintiff sold the oil to the defendant. The plaintiff's license allowed him to sell the good to somebody with a license. The defendant didn't have a license. So what do you think that was the outcome of this case? Do you have any ideas? Exactly, the contract was not enforced. And the reason for this was because the contract was expressly prohibited by the statute. So that's why the plaintiff could not recover. What happened in Mohammed versus Alaga? Have you read this case, or would you like me to tell you the facts? Does somebody know about this case? Okay, it's fine. Okay, so in this case, what happened here? This case involves an oral contract by M to introduce refugees to A and act as a translator in exchange of half the legal aid fees A could claim for work in respect to the refugees' immigration and asylum applications. The contract here was unenforceable by reference of legislation preventing solicitors from sharing their fees. The court, however, allowed M's claim for quantum merit, the value of the services, because the parties would not equally to blame. Here, A had knowingly disregarded the professional conduct rules, while M had been unaware of any impropriety in the agreement. The Court of Appeal here found that while any contract to introduce refugees was prohibited by legislation, it might be possible to recover on a quantum merit basis for the translation services provided in relation to the refugees. What happened is that the translation services were not covered by the legislation, and public policy would not be offended by allowing such a recovery. So here we have like two different cases. In the first one, like the plaintiff couldn't enforce the contract at all because the contract was expressly prohibited by a statute. But here in Mohammed versus Alaga and Company, one of the parties and could recover on a quantum merit basis, which is the value of the services, of the translation services he provided, because the legislation didn't talk about translation services per se. It just only talk about the introduction of refugees was only talked by the legislation, but not translation services. So that's why M could recover on a quantum merit basis. Now let's talk about contracts that are illegal as performed. We said a little before, contracts that are illegal as performed, these contracts are maybe legal in its formation, but illegal in its performance, okay? This type of contract is intended to further an improper purpose or to be performed in an illegal way. Generally, this contract is unenforceable by the party contracted with such intention or knowing of the other party's intention to this effect. We have two cases that illustrate this. St. John Shipping Corporation versus Joseph Rank Limited and Parking Guild Limited versus Summerfield Stores. Does somebody know about the first case, St. John Shipping Corporation? Yeah, that's a good summary. Thank you, Sharon. Yes, in St. Johnson Shipping Corporation, what happened is that A contract for the carriage of goods by sea was lawful in its formation, but performed illegally when the ship owner overloaded the ship carrying the goods. The overloading was a statutory offense, and the master of the ship was fined for this offense. The court held that the ship owner was entitled to recover the monies owed for the freight. Here, the court was concerned with a breach of that statute and the performance of a contract in breach of that statute. So the question was answered in relation to performance by asking whether the statute intended to prohibit the type of contract sued on. On the construction of the relevant statute, that it didn't. It did not. Can I ask you a favor? Do you think if you can put your microphones in mute, please? Thank you. So within this subject, that contracts are illegal as performed, there are two types of cases where illegality renders a contract unenforceable from the outset. One is where the contract is entered with the intention of committing an illegal act. The other is where the contract is expressly or implicitly prohibited by a statute. Okay. If a contracting party performs an illegal act in the course of performance of a contract, what impact does that conduct have on the availability of remedies for breach of contract? Can the innocent party use that illegality as a defense in order to avoid, let's say, payment of damages for breach of contract? What do you think? I'm going to repeat it again, okay? Let's say a contracting party performs an illegal act in the course of performance of a contract. What impact does conduct have on the availability of remedies for breach of contract? Can the innocent party use that illegality as a defense in order to avoid payment of damages for breach of contract? What do you think? Another answer? Okay. This question that I have asked you was considered in the second case, in Parking Gate Limited versus Summerfield Stores Limited. What happened here is the parties enter into a contract in terms of which the plaintiff had agreed to provide an automated monitoring and control system for some of the S-car parts, okay? So here are two parties, P and S. The system read and recorded the vehicle registration numbers and types of entry and departure of vehicles using the car part. The system was able to determine when a car had overstayed the maximum time permitted for customer use of the car park, and therefore when a penalty was due. P was also responsible for pursuing customers who failed to pay. Okay, so here we have a contract between P and S. P was going to provide assistance for S car parts, and also P was also responsible for pursuing customers who failed to pay. Okay, this might involve sending out a number of letters to the customer, and in individual cases, customers receive 4 different letters. It was the terms of those letters that P sent to the customers which formed the focus of the dispute. Because as further letters were sent to an individual customer, the term of those letters escalated, becoming very, very aggressive. The later letters incorporated an attempt like to mimic a police letter and contain falsehoods. P was entitled to retain the fee and so had an incentive to operate the fine system aggressively. Okay, the contract was to endure for 15 months, but was terminated early by S after 5 months. So there is like, we can say like a breach of contract by S. P raised an action for breach. S raised the defense of illegality, citing P's unlawful actions committed in performance of the contract. Okay, at first, it alleged that P's conduct has been both criminal and tortious in nature, but as the case progressed, the allegations of criminal conduct were dropped. The court held that where a claimant's contractual performance could have been carried out lawfully, illegality was not a defense to the claim. That was the opinion of the court. So here we see that P was sending these, kind of threatened letters to the customer of S, and it's supposed like the contract between P and S was going to last 15 months, but S terminated the contract after 5 months, and when P sued S for breach of contract, S raised the defense of illegality, and the court held that where a claimant's contractual performance could have been carried out lawfully, illegality was not a defense to the claim. Let's talk about common law illegality now. In these situations, the illegality affects a contract not by the way of a statutory prohibition, but by way of a common law prohibition. Here we have 2 categories. Cases that involve in the commission of a legal wrong, case which involve contracts contrary to public policy. For instance, a case that involves in the commission of a legal wrong is a contract to commit a murder, for instance. Okay, let's analyze the cases that shows, the commission of legal wrong. In the first case, Alexander versus Rayson, the landlord, what happened here is the landlord got his tenant to sign rent for £450, and then to sign a service agreement of £750. The landlord's objective was to defraud revenue authorities by only showing the first document, which was related to the rent for £450. The tenant refused to pay the full amount because services were poor. What the court said is like the contract was illegal, that the landlord couldn't sue because here the landlord led the premises with guilty intent, so he cannot sue for rent. So here the intention of the landlord in the beginning was to defraud the revenue authorities. So that's why the contract could not enforce and the landlord could not sue for rent. His intention was illegal. Can somebody tell me about the facts of the second case, Beresford versus Royal Exchange Assurance? Does somebody know what this case is about? Hello? Okay, thank you. Well, in this case, what happened is a person, Mayor Rollinson, took out a number of life insurance contracts on his own life for what were then substantial sums of money. Okay? Each policy contained an express clause that if the life assured committed suicide within 1 year of the commencement of the contract was to be void. Okay, so here is a person who gets a life insurance, okay, and the policy contains an express clause saying that if this person committed suicide within 1 year of the commencement of the contract was void. Some years later, Mayor Rollinson found that he could not pay a premium. He got an extension of time in which to pay, and a few minutes before the time expired, he shot himself. The life office refused to pay the sums assured, and his estate sued the life office. Okay, at first at the trial, the jury decided that Mayor Rollinson was sane at the time he shot himself. In the House of Lords, Lord Atkins said, literally, if there is no express reference to suicide in the policy, two results follow. In the first place, intentional suicide by a man of sound mind, which I will call sane suicide, ignoring the important question of the test of sanity, will prevent the representatives of the assured from recovery. Okay? On ordinary principles of insurance law, an assured cannot by his own deliberate act cause the event upon which the insurance money is payable. The insurers have not agreed to pay on that happening. In the second place, this doctrine obviously does not apply to insane suicide. If one premises that the insanity in question prevents the act from being in law, the act of the assured. Okay, in this case, there was a clause dealing with suicide. Lord Atkins said that the rights of the parties must be ascertained from the terms of the contract in accordance with the ordinary rule applicable to the interpretation of contract. Okay, so here it was clear that the life office promised Mayor Rollinson that if he, in full possession of his senses, intentionally killed himself, they would pay him. But then the House of Lords said, you know, that a man is not to be allowed to have recourse to a court of justice to claim a benefit from his crime, whether under a contract or a gift. Here, the House of Lords decided that a suicide was a crime. The contract could not enforce by the state of the deceased. We can say, like, then that because the man killed himself, that was considered a crime, so that's why the state could not enforce the contract between the deceased person and the insurance company. Do you think, like, nowadays, like in the present time, suicide is considered a crime? Today, suicide is not longer considered a crime. And so the case would have been decided differently if it would have happened today. The state would have been able to recover the sum assured. So, we can see like when with the passage of time, some concepts change, So now let's talk about cases which involve contracts contrary to public policy. These cases are more troublesome because of the difficulty of ascertaining what the public policy is and whether or not the contract offends against it. Courts have found that public policy is offended in such a way as to make the contract illegal in a number of different areas. Therefore, a contract that is contrary to good morals may be illegal. Okay, so the question is, like, what is considered good morals? Like that is something that concept changes with the time. We can see this in this case, Pierce versus Brooks. Okay, in this case, what happens is, and this case is from 1866. In this case, what happened is like the defendant hired a new carriage from the plaintiff. The defendant was a prostitute, and the ornamental nature of the carriage indicated that the purpose for using the carriage was to attract customers. It was evident that the plaintiff was aware of this purpose, so he knew what the purpose of the defendant was. So having paid one installment, the defendant returned the carriage in bad conditions. And Pierce sued Brooks for damages. The court held that the plaintiff could not recover the money because he was aware of the defendant's illegal purpose. The legal purpose in that time was to attract customers. If the plaintiff had been unaware of the defendant's activities, then he would not have been implicated in the legality. In this situation, the illegality would not have barred him from recovering damages. So here we can see, like, maybe in this case, now in this time, the plaintiff would have recovered for damages because the purpose of the defendant nowadays is not considered against good morals, therefore not contrary to public policy. Okay. Also, contracts which are found to be prejudicial to family life are affected by illegality. Okay, because society protects family. So if there is a contract against family life, public policy will be affected, and the society per se will be affected as well. So in this, we have this case, Lowy versus Pierce. In this case, the defendant entered into the following covenant. Okay, this was the words of the covenant. I do hereby promise Mrs. Catherine Lowy that I will not marry any person besides herself. If I do, I agree to pay her £1,000 within 3 months after I shall marry anybody else. The court held that this contract was void, remarking that it was not a promise to marry Mrs. Lowy, but not to marry anyone else. And yet she was under no obligation to marry him. So we can see this contract was prejudicial to family life and affected by illegality. So that's why the court held that it was void. Does anybody know the facts of the case Herman versus Charlesworth? Do you know what this case is about? Okay, in this case, Ms. H entered into an agreement under which if the defendant introduced her to someone whom she married, Ms. H would have to pay the defendant £250. She paid a deposit, which after several unsuccessful introductions, she sought to recover. The Court of Appeal held that the contract was illegal as being contrary to public policy. Another type of cases or another situations where cases are contrary to cases that involve contracts, contrary to public policy, are like a contract that attempts to restrain the administration of justice. This type of contracts that try to restrain justice is illegal. We can see this in the last case that is mentioned in this slide, R versus Andrews. Here, the appellant visited R and intimated that R was in trouble with the police and would need a good witness. The appellant invited R to pay him money as a consideration for giving false evidence on behalf of R. The appellant was charged with soliciting and inciting R to pervert the course of justice by offering in consideration for a reward to make a false statement to the police related to the accident that R was involved, in which criminal proceedings were being instituted against R. So here we can see that this contract that Andrew tried to make with R was trying to restrain the administration of justice, obstruct justice. So, it was illegal. Also, contracts that impose a restraint of trade also can offend public policy. I'm not going to talk about this kind of contract here because there is a class for this. So I don't want to give you so much information about this type of contracts now. We are going to talk about it in the future lectures. Okay, let's talk about the effects of illegality. Illegality is a difficult topic because there is not a single form of illegality. So it is difficult to ascertain the effect of illegality upon any one contract. A contract may have both legal and illegal terms. And when it is possible to remove an illegal term or an illegal part of the term, a court can sever that term and leave the remainder of the contract standing. Okay? We are going to see here cases, and the first two cases are related when illegal contracts are not enforced, but a remedy is provided. Okay? In the first case, Strongman Limited versus Sincock. Here, the defendant employed a firm of builders to modernize his house. He promised to get the necessary licenses, without which it was illegal to do the work, but he only got licenses, the defendant only got licenses for part of the work and refused to pay for the rest on the ground that the contract to do it was illegal. The builders could not sue on the contract to do the work, although they acted in good faith, but they recovered damages amounting to the value of the unlicensed work for breach of the defendant's collateral undertaking to get the necessary licenses. So here we see that, you know, the contract, because was against an statute that says that a license was needed to do a certain type of work, couldn't be enforced, but remedies were provided. But it was not because it was not based on the contract to do the work, but it was based on the breach of the defendant's collateral undertaking to get the license necessary. Okay, the defendant, remember, promised the builders that he was going to get the necessary licenses. So, in Shelley versus Paddock, the plaintiff was, by the fraud of the defendant, induced to enter into a contract to buy a house in Spain and to make payments under it which were illegal, as they violated exchange control regulations. Since the plaintiff's breach of the law was innocent and resulted from the defendant's fraud, the plaintiff was entitled to damages for that fraud. So here we can see like the plaintiff was not aware that she was breaching the law. However, because she was induced to this contract by this fraud, she was entitled to damages for that fraud. So here, in these two cases, the court was able to provide the innocent party with a remedy, although it didn't enforce the illegal contract. Okay, remember in the first case, Strongman Limited, the builders could get damages not because of the contract, but because of the collateral undertaking of D to get the necessary licenses. And in the second case, the plaintiff could recover because of the defendant's fraud. Was entitled to damages for the defendant's fraud. Okay? Another issue is whether a party can be permitted to recover a benefit conferred upon the other party to an illegal contract. We have said before that the general rules is that courts will not permit recovery under an illegal contract. However, there are situations in which recovery will be allowed, where the parties are said not to be in pari delicto, which means equally guilty. The reason here is to prevent the other party from retaining a benefit which constitutes an unjust enrichment. In the case of Kiridi Cotton Company versus Diwani, what happened here was this case considered the issue of illegal contracts and whether or not a tenant could recover all of the rent paid to a landlord under a lease that was in violation of legislation in relation to excessive rent. The innocent party to an illegal contract was able to recover the money paid pursuant to the illegal contract. The party was innocent in the sense that he was unaware that the contract was illegal. Also, there are cases that we have seen where the party has been allowed to recover a benefit when he withdraws from the contract before the illegality has been committed. Okay? In the first case, Taylor versus Bowers, what happened here was like the plaintiff was being pressed by his creditors to prevent certain machinery from falling into their hands. The plaintiff transferred it to one alcove. He then called 2 meetings of creditors in an attempt to reach a settlement with them, but none was reached. The plaintiff successfully claimed the machinery back from the defendant, who was one of the creditors and had obtained the machinery from alcove with notice of the fraudulent scheme and in the hope of benefiting from it. The decision of the court is based on the fact that the legal purpose had not been carried out, not creditor had been defrauded. So we can say that if money is paid or goods delivered for an illegal purpose, the person who has to pay the money or deliver the goods may recover them back before the illegal purpose is carried out. Okay? In the second case, in Curley versus Thompson, the plaintiff had a bankrupt friend. He paid the defendant £40 in return for their undertaking not to appear at the bankrupt's public examination and not to oppose his discharge. The defendants duly absented themselves from the public examination, but before any application had been made for the bankrupt discharge, the plaintiff claimed back the £40. His claim failed. Here, there had been a partial carrying into effect of an illegal purpose in a substantial manner. So here, the plaintiff has partly committed an illegal act. That's why his claim fails. In the third case, Tribe versus Tribe, what happened here was like a father transferred company shares to his son to preserve them for the family's benefit because he could be soon liable for dilapidation under commercial leases. it turned out that the father was not liable, and the son refused to retransfer the shares. The Court of Appeal held that the father could demand return of the shares because his illegal scheme had not in fact been carried into effect. So those are the cases that illustrate, like, like a party can recover a benefit when that party withdraws from the contract before the illegality has been committed. Finally, in this topic, the party has been allowed to recover a benefit where he can do so without relying on the illegal nature of the contract. In the case of Bowmakers Limited versus Barnett Instrument, here there was an agreement that didn't comply with statutory requirements. The defendant missed payments due under the agreement, and the claimant sought to recover the machine. The defendant argued that the claimant's illegality in failing to comply with the statutory requirements barred the recovery. The claimant didn't plead the illegal agreement in making their claim. It was based on their ownership of the machine, and therefore they didn't need to rely on their illegality to found the claim. So here was an issue of title. The contract in this case was illegal because didn't comply with the requirements stated in an statute, but, the claimant could recover the machine because he had title over it. He was the owner. It was based on the ownership of the machine. Okay, this last slide is about the reform of the law. The Law Commission sought the reform in the area of illegality and made some recommendations. The most important one was that courts would possess a discretion to decide whether or not to enforce an illegal transaction, to recognize that property rights have been transferred or created by it, or to allow benefits conferred under it to be recovered. This discretion would be applied only where a statute didn't expressly prohibit the transaction. Okay, so that's everything for this lecture of illegality and public policy. Do you have any questions? I know that it's kind of like a difficult area, but we need to see, like the general idea is like courts would not enforce an illegal contract, would not allow a recovery of a benefit confirmed upon the contract, but there are exceptions. We need to see, like the circumstances around each contract. As we have seen in the cases that I have mentioned, like the courts have decided in different ways. And also remember, like if a contract, if a contract is against a statute or the statute expressly or impliedly prohibits that contract is illegal per se. Okay, so let me know if you have any questions, please, through Ms. Uyala, and I would be more than happy to answer them. Thank you very much, and have a nice weekend. Bye. Thank you.